Howdy y'all, and welcome to the Mr. Maple Show. Today we're going to be bringing you a fun and exciting topic. We're talking about the spring interest group of Japanese maples, the Corallinum group. Guys, this is a really fun, exciting group. Go ahead and smash that like button. If you're not subscribed to us here on the YouTube channel, make sure you're subscribed. We put out daily content about Japanese maples. You're going to love it. And also check out our weekly podcast on your favorite podcast platform. That's right, we put out one each and every week. Guys, we're bringing it here on the Mr. Maple Show, so we'd appreciate it if you shop with us on MrMaple.com. So, the spring interest group, this Corallinum group, what is that? Well, one of our good friends, Cor Van Gelderen, divided up a lot of the Japanese maples into different groups. And the Corallinum group is named after Acer palmatum corallinum. It has a spring flowering interest that is exceptional. It's one of those trees that in the spring, the leaves themselves look like flowers out there in the garden. And flowers can barely compete with the color that these trees can provide with the foliage on these actual trees. They're some of the most spectacular Japanese maples in the garden in the early spring, the harbingers of spring, often some of the very first ones to leaf out with exceptional and intense colors. So we're going to talk today about some of those and really talk about what you can do to actually have the best color out of these each and every season. Now let's start off with Corallinum. This is the namesake of the group. Corallinum is an exceptional tree. It's more of like a shrub type, 6 to 8 foot and 6 to 8 foot year and 6 to 8 foot tall and 6 to 8 foot wide in 10 years. It brings a bright coral pink in the spring. And it's one of the most intense coral pinks. And this is the group that everybody knows this group by. But you know, there are other plants in this group that have what people say shades of pink, like Desojo, for instance, or Shin Desojo. We're talking about red or pink red. They're intense. They have smaller foliage. Most of these are that Acer palmatum style grouping, so it's more of that smaller leaf. And they just bring intense colors. Desojo is extremely popular for bonsai, and same with Shin Desojo. Desojo can give you a little more pink-red color, where Shin Desojo gives you a little more red color. They both make upright trees, but at that springtime is just exceptional. Now, Reuben, this is a selection by our good friend Cor Van Gelderen himself, the man who had made some of these groupings, named after his son. It is more of a shrub type, and it's a bright pink as well, and it can give you a coral pink to a hot pink depending on the years. Next up, I've got coral pink. This is an upright tree. It's a selection that was found by Jelena de Broder. Now, Jelena, it might sound familiar to you. There's Hamamelis Jelena, which is named for her as well. This was found at Arboretum Calmute. Coral pink, it's an upright pink. That'll end up getting 6 feet tall by about 6 foot in width. And it just gives you a bright pink out there in the landscape. When we're talking about pink, we're talking about more of that traditional baby pink color. Now, there's also Coral Magic. And this can often be a lighter pink and is more upright in its nature, so it's not as wide growing as Coral Pink is. They have very similar names and sometimes get confused because Coral Magic and Coral Pink are both pink in the spring, but they're different shades of pink. Some of my favorite pinks are by my good friend Dick Vandermaat. He's introduced so many fantastic trees, and one of his selections is Isabel. And this tree is one of the most hot pink colors of this Corallinum group. It puts on an intense color for me almost each and every year. He's also introduced Hinotori Nishiki, which can be more of a coral pink. And then he's also introduced Phoenix, which can actually be more of a coral peach pink. He recently sent me an email with the two original Hinotori Nishiki and Phoenix side by side, so you can actually see the color differences these typically provide in the same environment. I think this is really important because a lot of these spring pinks are environmental based on sunlight, based on the amount of nitrogen and the amount of phosphorus in the soil. We'll talk about that a little bit more a little bit later, but it's neat to see a side-by-side comparison in the exact same garden setting. Phoenix is one of those plants. It's more of that coral peach pink. It's one of my favorite Japanese maples because when I first bought a really nice camera, a Nikon, we were able to capture this tree in exceptional spring color. Those are one of our first cameras. I think we use a lot of Canon platform now, but it was one of the most outstanding photos that I'd ever taken, and it was exceptional. And we actually have a meme sometimes we throw up that says, it's that spring's here. We get so excited we wet our plants. And that's with the Phoenix photo, because it was one of the very best photos we ever had. Isabel was in that category as well, because the spring pink on that was so hot pink, it just grabs your attention. These trees, you can use them in so many unique ways in the garden. If you've got a lot of azaleas out there in the garden that are blooming that early spring, by scattering around a lot from this Corallinum group, you can really add a new dimension to a woodland garden setting. And in a way that will grab people's attention, because you're adding that flowering interest with these spring interest Japanese maples. Now, you heard me say earlier, sunlight can be a factor on growing these trees out there in the garden. Well, what types of sunlight? Well, full sun will give you the most intense colors on many of these selections of this Corallinum group. The problem is with that intensity comes a shorter lived color, because many of these trees put on amazing spring color. Then they go to a green during the summer. Some may have summer flushes of new growth that give you color again, and then you get a fall color. So they are the embodiment of the changes of the seasons with Japanese maples. That's one of the reasons why they're so popular for bonsai, because you can get a different tree each and every season with different colors whenever it comes to many of these in the Corallinum group. And intense colors. I mean, some of the most intense, but sunlight will often peak those colors. So if you can give them more sunlight, you're going to get a much, much stronger color and richer, bolder color off many of these trees. Now, nitrogen is another one of those things that can increase your intensity, but also increase how quickly you get green into the foliage. So you've got to be careful with how you use your nitrogen in fertilizers with the Corallinum group. It definitely can increase the intensity, but too much will actually push green into the foliage quicker, and you won't be able to enjoy that spring color for a long part of the season. Often plants that have been in the ground and are established show fantastic spring color and hold on to it longer throughout the season, even with minimal fertilizing. So be careful how you play with the nitrogen, because as that plant gets established and the plant thrives out there in the landscape, you're going to get a better pink color each and every part of the season. Now, higher amounts of phosphorus has proven to actually increase the intensity without shrinking the amount of time that the plant actually puts on that color. So keep in mind, you can fertilize with a little bit higher amounts of phosphorus to really add to the color of many in the Corallinum group. These changes in the seasons are exceptional. And while I talked about many of the environmental factors that you can control, like the sunlight, the nitrogen, the phosphorus, there are some things that are out of our control. And one of these things is the temperature changes as the plant is leafing out. Many times I've saw a Acer palmatum, Desojo or Syndesojo in the spring looking almost yellow. And I often thought to myself, what happened to cause this color? And if we get a heavy frost on Desojo or Syndesojo as it's leafing out, if we get a real cold spell happening right as those buds are beginning to unfurl, instead of getting the intense pink reds or reds that we are used to, you can actually get sometimes more of a yellow color that's sort of glowing. And it's really confusing at first, because you thought this tree was a red tree, but now we've got a yellow glowing color. And this is just an environmental factor that we can't control, but it has been something that I have seen happen multiple times here in Western North Carolina. And this can happen with any of the trees in this group. And it changes the colors quite drastically. And so each and every year, if you have unpredictable weather, you may have a different spring color on these plants But if you control the sunlight, the nitrogen, and the phosphorus, you can really have some of the most high intense colors on this Corallinum group. And I talked to you about many in that Corallinum group already, but there are some ones in this Corallinum group that have a little bit something extra. They might be in this Corallinum group, but they might also be in another section as well. The first one I'm going to mention is Otaha. It is pretty much like an improved Beni Hime. It gives you that spring interest of that Corallinum group in a smaller, denser, compact habit. Likely it was found as some sort of witch's broom because it does sometimes have shortened center nodes, but they're not as prominent as they are on the cultivar Beni Hime, which for us has proven to be a little more on the finicky side. Otaha, an exceptional dwarf compact select, and possibly the smallest of this Corallinum group that we'd be producing here at Mr. Maple. Now, another one that's really interesting is Acer Palmatum Noel. This is pretty much a variegated form of Shindesojo. It gets flecks of pink variegation on top of the red. And so you get everything you love about the Desojo, that bright red, but variegation on that as well. That just gives it a little bit something extra out there in the landscape. So when it goes to the green, you can actually see variegation across the foliage. So you get that little extra added bonus. On that same thought pattern, we've got happy Corallinum. Well, why is Corallinum happy? Because it has extra variegation. Variegation makes everybody happy. It has extra flecking. Now, to be honest, many of these in this group can actually get flecking variegation in the actual foliage. This Corallinum group often displays a tendency to have a little bit of variegation in their foliage that can be brought out even with more phosphorus. You can actually start to see more of that. And if you stabilize some of those variegation and those variegated parts, if it becomes a consistent thing, you may have a cultivar like Noel or Happy Corallinum. Now, one that is sort of in this group that's an honorable mention is Beni Fushigi. Beni Komachi, they're very similar. They're sports that look like they came off of the cultivar Beni Mako. Beni Mako would definitely be in this group. Beni Fushigi and Beni Komachi have leaves from a variegated sport, and when it's sported, they have leaves more like a Kamagata, but they still have this Corallinum group coloring. And so it's this Corallinum group plus something a little bit extra. So I had to include it in here. I think when we put everything into exact groups, there's going to be always plants that break the rules. And sometimes plants fit in multiple categories. And it just makes things fun and exciting. These are such high intense plants out there in the landscape. If you plant these out in the landscape, they're going to draw everybody's attention in the spring. And then when they go from the spring color to the summer color, it basically just creates such a dynamic difference between that and the spring and the summer that when the fall hits, you pay attention to them because they go crazy again. And that's one of the things I love about this spring interest group of Japanese maples. They give such high intensity colors that will grab your attention and add that extra pop in the garden. You don't have to put these in the ground. You can grow these in a container garden. You can grow these out in bonsai. I think many of these selections haven't even been tried in bonsai, at least not in numbers. I mean, things like Reuben and Phoenix and Isabel, is Hinotori Nishiki. There's not many of those in the United States as bonsai. But guys, they're everything people love about Corallinum. They're everything people love about DeSojo, but different colors. Now, when we went and visited Tom Cox, we did a lot of videos at his garden before he passed away, and even featured him on our podcast. He is the co-author of Landscaping with Conifers and Ginkgos in the South. And in Georgia, we were going down his driveway, and he's been a friend of ours for years. And one of the plants that he fell in love with was Acer Palmatum Corallinum, the namesake of this group. And he had multiple ones planted along his driveway. And it's because he enjoyed how beautiful this plant was in the spring, how this tree changed throughout the season. And I think as you begin to plant more from the Corallinum group in your yard, you might find that you end up planting multiples of the same variety because of how these trees can add a new dynamic to your garden. We really appreciate y'all jumping in and watching this video today. Take care, God bless, and have a great day.